away your possessions is considered the easiest, or to not freak out when they're taken from you. To be able to give up attachment to the body is also considered, it's the middle difficulty. And the hardest of all is to even contemplate being able to let go of your positive qualities and your outer, comfortable, outer, supportive outer circumstances. So these verses deal with the attachment to the body, and basically he's just using a lot of arguments to try to shake up the attachment to the body. And so a lot of it sounds like body is bad. And in our culture, that's not too helpful a message, because so many of us have a lot of loathing about our bodies and criticism about our bodies anyway. And that's the form our attachment takes, actually, is negative. A negative attachment, like I'm too fat, I have too many wrinkles, I'm getting old, I'm not fit enough, and I don't know, you know how it is. I'm losing my hair, and also so he's going to give many arguments about, basically he's saying, life is short. And since death is certain, but the time of death is uncertain, in other words, we know we'll die, but we don't know when, contemplating that way, think, what is the most important thing? What's the most important way for me to spend my time until I die, so that actually death is an experience of enlightenment, or letting go into the vastness of openness of my mind, rather than a terrifying experience. So since death is certain, but the time of death is uncertain, what's the most important thing? And he says, the most important thing is not obsessing about if you're looking good. So at the end of these verses, he basically says the kind of culminating thing that he ends with on verse 70, which we'll get to, is basically, we need this body to attain enlightenment. It's like a vessel, he uses that, a ship. And we need to take good care of it so that it won't sink, sooner than it needs to. But on the other hand, if we're always afraid that it might get wet, or that, even a slight voyage out into a pond is going to harm the paint job, or tarnish the metal or something, then it's not going to take us to the other shore. It's not even going to get off the beach, So this is really kind of his message here, that use this body well, take care of it, but this obsession is what he's talking about, is a major form of self-absorption, one of the three big ones. So in verse 59, the first thing he's going to say is, it's going to die, so why are you spending so much time on it? So read verse 59.
When vultures with their love of flesh are tugging at this body all around, small will be the joy you get from it, O mind. Why are you so besought with it now?
So actually, in these verses, I like to read them as having a lot of humor. And I think this verse has a lot of humor. He's basically saying, when you die, like in India and Tibet, the bodies would be put out, either to be cremated or just put on the open ground, because the ground was frozen in Tibet. And then the vultures would come and start tearing at it. So it means when you're dead, the vultures eat it. And you're not going to get any joy from it then, so why are you so besotted about it now, he says. All right, so then verse 60, he basically uses the argument where he says, and also this body, we're so much more than this body. The body is like, what do they say, a guest house, or a temporary residence, Like the image is often used that when you move into you spend 1 or 2 nights in a motel room or something, you don't spend the whole time redecorating, although you might like to. But if you had just moved into a furnished apartment and you were going to be living there, you'd start to get self-absorbed about how it looked. But with a motel room, you might say, yuck, these carpets, and yuck, these paintings, and yuck, But on the other hand, It's so no big deal, right? No big deal. So that's kind of the attitude. And so with verse 60, he's basically saying it's like a short-term rental, respect it, but don't get into this big ownership thing. Okay, so verse 60.
Why, O mind, do you protect this body, claiming it as though it were yourself? You and it are each a separate entity. However can it be of use to you?
So that's the notion of the short-term rental. You know, it's like it can be of use to you. Later he's going to say that, but not if you're obsessing about it. Then it becomes, you see, it's like simple. We have this body. It can be helpful or it can be a hindrance. These verses are about let's let it be helpful rather than a hindrance, and pointing to how we use it, we obsess about it, and therefore it becomes a hindrance to awakening. In verse 61, he uses logic and reasoning, and he uses a common logic and reasoning from those days, which is to point out the uncleanness of the body. And this is very common, considered as an antidote to lust, for instance, or over-attachment to your body is like, hey, you know, how come you're so attached to this thing which is actually filled with blood, shit, piss, mucus, yuck, it's horrible. Like, you must be out of your mind to be getting so attached to it or to somebody else's body for that matter. And so I think if you think of this as funny, it's great. But you could see how in our culture, this kind of thing, if you got really earnest about it and serious about it, aversion to the body, I don't think it would work too well, since we're so much into aversion towards ourselves anyway. But in this case, the idea is to just point out that we think of it as so kind of special, you know, we work out and we tan it and we put lotions and we do all these things. And that's not a problem, except that underneath there's some kind of like unconscious or conscious thought that maybe we could never die if we did this, and that we would never age, like the wrinkles actually would, if we, those bottles say anti-wrinkle, you know, that means that if I just use them from the time I'm 12, then actually when I hit my middle 50s, I'm still not going to have even the slightest little wrinkle, you know. And then, of course, there's facelifts, right? Probably many of us in this room have had facelifts or are contemplating it. But, you know, in the beginning, it seems like maybe nobody notices. You just say, gee, you look really good, and you feel great, you know, because instead of that face you were looking at a few weeks ago, you have this kind of young face. But when you become obsessed and you just keep doing it, boy, is there anything more creepy than how Cher looks now, you know? And so, you know, you're 70 years old, and even though you yourself have admired these pictures of these wise old people with a lot of wrinkles, looking so beautiful in their elder years because of the sort of genuineness of their face and the experience that's in their face, even though you yourself have admired it, you go for, you know, getting all those wrinkles out of there, and you begin to look like a living mummy by that time. Because it's weird to be 70 years old and, you know, still have bright red hair and no wrinkles, but somehow you're still sort of stooped, and there's still some things that facelifts don't change, you know. So read 61.
Why not cling, O foolish mind, to something clean, a figure carved in wood or some such thing? Why do you protect and guard an unclean engine for the making of impurity?
So what he means by unclean engine for making of impurity is pus, shit, urine, you know, sweat, and so forth. So you can buy that argument or not, but it's one of many. So now, verse 62 through 67, he does a kind of emptiness meditation. And to me, this is the key to the whole thing. He describes doing a mental examination or exploration of your body to try to find what it is actually that you're so obsessed about. Like trying to find, as he says in the verses, the thingness of it. What is it exactly that we're obsessing about? You know, what is it? To try to actually find it. Like, is it the eye? Is it the eyelash? Is it the fingernails? Or like, well, it's the whole body, you might say. But then he says, well, you just keep looking and looking deeper and deeper, like under the skin, down to the bones. And you're just trying to find what it is. Can we find something, the thing it is that we're actually attached to? The underlying idea with this kind of teaching on the unfindability of what it is that we're so self-absorbed in is that you can't actually, you impute a lot of meaning to the body. You impute a lot of meaning to somebody else's. You give it meaning that it actually doesn't have. Like, it represents, if I could just keep it looking beautiful, then I'd be happy. You see what I'm saying? It represents something to us that actually isn't so. And those of you who have managed to stay really looking good and fit and, you know, and doing all the things that help you to do that, and you know, people think of you as very, very handsome or very, very beautiful and stuff. Did that do it for you? I mean, did that hold out the promise? Maybe you feel good when you look in the mirror or when you put on some new clothes, but maybe you have a few other problems in your life. You know, like it didn't really solve it. So these verses are trying to find what it is that we're attached to. Verse 62 through 64. Basically, he's giving a lot of different arguments about why it's silly to be so obsessed. Okay. 62 through 64, Glenna.
First, with mind's imagination, shed the covering of skin, and with the blade of wisdom strip the flesh from off the bony frame. And when you have divided all the bones and searched right down amid the very marrow, you should look and ask the question, where is thingness to be found? If persisting in the search you find no underlying object, why still cherish, and with such desire, the fleshy form you now possess?
And so he says, why still cherish and with such desire? Now, it's interesting because in the teaching that Shantideva has given earlier about our attachment to our things, to our body, and to our good qualities, he talks about this, and he says the problem is that as long as you're attached, obsessing about things, body, and qualities, then you're always locked in to a life that's based on hope and fear. Hoping it will go the way you want, fearing that it won't. And you're just caught all the time between the prongs of hope and fear, hope and fear. It's like it diminishes the quality of your life. Okay, verse 65, he's continuing on this discussion about the body. And so 65, I consider this an 8th century Buddhist joke. So read it, Glenna.
Its filth you cannot eat, O mind. Its blood likewise is not for you to drink. Its innards too unsuitable to suck. This body, what then will you make of it?
So in other words, he's being satirical. He's saying, you know, what's the use of this body? You can't eat it. You can't drink it. You can't even suck it. Its innards too are like, you know, unsuitable. I don't hear any of you laughing at this joke. Anyway, his key point is he's using a kind of satiricalness to just sort of make a joke and say, like, we make so much of it, but, you know, what's its use? What is its actual use? But here I want to, you know, make the same point again that I made before, is that if these teachings were taken too seriously and too kind of self-seriously, with too much self-importance, then it could so easily turn into, you know, self-loathing. And that would be as much a form of self-absorption as this pampering and overindulgence or obsessing with the body. So then another part of the 8th century Buddhist joke is verse 66. Let's see if we get a laugh on this one. Okay.
As second best, it may indeed be kept as food to feed the vulture and the fox. The value of this human form lies only in the way that it is used.
So the satirical part of the first two lines where he says, well, maybe we can't get much use out of it as food or drink, but animals would like to eat it, so maybe that's the use of this body, if we're really trying to search for some good use for it. Although later he's going to say, actually he says it right here, this is the key. The value of this human form lies only in the way that it is used. So actually, if you died and some animals could eat it, that would be a good use of it, But basically, what's really pointed to with these last two lines in verse 66, which he'll be reiterating again, is that it's very useful, because without it we can't attain enlightenment. But if we obsess about it, then it doesn't serve that valuable and precious purpose. Okay, verses 67 and 68 are contemplations on impermanence and death, and basically the message is you can't take it with you. Okay, about the body still. 67 and 68.
Whatever you may do to guard and keep it, what will you do when the Lord of Death, the ruthless, unrelenting, steals and throws it to the birds and dogs? Slaves unsuitable for work are not rewarded with supplies and clothing. This body, though you pamper it, will leave you. Why exhaust yourself with such great labor? So he likes to use these analogies, and again, I think they have, for him and his audience, they were sort of humorous, but he's saying, when servants or your employees or anything like that aren't able to work anymore, you don't continue to pay the wages or whatever. And well, this is a kind of, I'm sure, not politically correct, these lines here in the modern society. But in any case, the body, the analogy is that the body will stop being useful because it will grow old and get sick and then die on you. And so why exhaust it with such labor? And I honestly think that in our culture, this is a very important point. Because, especially in Boulder, Colorado, this is a very important point. Some places there's more fitness consciousness than other places. And Boulder is definitely a big fitness place. Colorado in general is a big fitness place. You go to New York City, it's not so in your face, right? And people still jog and everything, but I don't know. There's something about the sun is always shining here and everyone's tan and looking great and, jogging in their outfits and just, so not meaning to put that down. I'm just saying that in a culture such as Boulder or Colorado or many places in the United States where fitness is like sometimes held out as like a spiritual path, I think you could think twice about that. Okay. So now verse 69. So pay this body with due remuneration, but then be sure to make it work for you. But do not lavish everything on what will not bring perfect benefit.
So here he's saying, he begins to sort of be a little more gentle in his tone and less satirical. And he says, get the rest you need. If you have the good fortune to be able to eat good food and medicines when you're sick, and all the things that are available to us now from healthcare, like acupuncture and so forth and so on, take advantage of all that, but draw the line between just staying healthy so that you can practice the Dharma, or that this good vehicle stays strong long enough so that we don't become so distracted by its pain of getting sick and old, that we could use it to attain enlightenment. Because myself now, I'm in nearly 70, and so I can tell you, you don't feel better and better as the years go on. Because just like with our cars or anything, metaphorically speaking, on our bodies, the handles fall off and the clock stops working and all of these things. And so my feeling is while the body is still in good, relatively good shape, that's the time to really practice. Because then if you get to be my age and in your 70s and 80s and 90s, if you live that long, then your mind is already steady. And it doesn't really matter. You're not thrown off by feeling sick and feeling lousy. It affects you, of course, but the steadiness is already there, and actually you've reached the point where your intention is clear and you really know what you're doing, and everything becomes an enhancement at that point for waking up. Because the one thing about getting older, so your old age, sickness, and death are sort of catching up with you, but at the same time, there's a lot of advantages. I find, for instance, that my mind is much more relaxed. Things that were such a big deal, like definitely I can't obsess about physical fitness because, my God, and there's no way that I can, have the illusion that the tautness of my skin is ever going to come back, or, that the jawline is ever going to, shape up, or that the wrinkles are going to go away. So it's not a big deal, and there's so much more relaxation. But I guess if I had really put all my eggs in the basket of looking good, maybe I'd be getting kind of depressed right around now, And so use it to wake up rather than to become more asleep. Use it. Use it because you'll lose it, Okay, so verse 70 is the kind of punchline that I referred to before about the real meaning of the precious human birth. So, verse 70.
Regard your body as a vessel, a simple boat for getting here and there. Make of it a wish-fulfilling gem to bring about the benefit of beings.
So that's really the idea, and that's why I was using that analogy, that if you're too worried about it getting water on it, or the deck getting stained, or the paint job being ruined, then it's not going to be very useful to you to get to the other shore. So that's really the point here. And it's very interesting being a student of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, because he used to put a lot of emphasis on eating well, looking good, and uplifting yourself, using this to uplift yourself, and also caring for your environment. He used to say, pay a lot of attention to detail, take care of things, take care of your body, take care of your clothing, your shoes, your hair, take care of your furniture. Just care for things, love things, and care for them. And so that was an approach of upliftedness. And so the line between upliftedness and obsession, it's a very fine one. And as students of Trungpa Rinpoche, many of us got hooked by this teaching that was supposed to lead to upliftedness. We just got obsessed with, having the right chair and the right blah, 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 the right clothing and everything. And it became just like anyone's normal, self-absorbed obsession with the whole thing. But the idea was that you can use the very same things to uplift your world and bring more joy to yourself and others. Connect with the wakefulness that's inherent in every moment of life by taking care of things. And in the Zen tradition, actually, they put a lot of emphasis on this, taking care of things and your body, and just taking care with a sense of gratitude and love. Okay, now that ends the section on the body, and we're still in the section, though, on gathering virtue, or Gewa. And now he starts to talk in verses 71 through 73. He gives some examples of mindfulness. That was our big topic for the first part of the book. He comes back to it now as one of the virtues. Mindfulness as one of the virtues. And here he talks about mindfulness in everyday life. And I'll comment on each of the verses. So, first, verse 71.
Thus, with free, untroubled mind, put on an ever-smiling countenance. Rid yourself of scowling, wrathful frowns, and be a true and honest friend to all.
So this one is about facial expression. And this is a very interesting one. We're often not aware of our facial expression. But we definitely, if you begin to notice, other people's facial expressions have a big impact on us. If someone else is scowling, most of us feel that we must have done something wrong. If someone is smiling and it's genuine, if their face is open, like with little kids, for instance, the openness of most children's faces, it makes you feel kind of friendly. And dogs, that those dogs can be so friendly, and it sort of brings out the best in you, and you can relax. So when someone else is genuinely, their face is open and relaxed, and there's some sense of warmth coming from them, other people benefit from that. They can feel more relaxed. Even if you're uptight, maybe it can help you to relax. And if you're sort of neutral, it cheers you up. Whereas if someone is frowning and scowling, even if they're not saying anything, usually it has nothing to do with you. It's because they're feeling bad. It affects you. So this really is not talking so much about other people. It's talking about our frowns and our relaxed expressions. And so you can't pretend to be relaxed and open when you're feeling uptight. But on the other hand, you could really be aware. It's like bigger perspective of the world. You could be aware that if your face is angry and scowling, you're triggering a lot of people's fear and also their feeling of poverty, that they did something wrong. And so you could at least work on sort of being conscious of your facial expression and the power it has to harm or help other people. So I think that's the message in this verse, and then you yourself just have to work on that in terms of where it takes you. But these verses, 72 through 74 and 75 also, are very much verses about the virtue of awareness of how what you do affects other people. Okay, so 72 is more of the same, but this time it's talking more about your actions.
Do not, acting inconsiderately, move furniture and chairs so noisily around. Likewise, do not open doors with violence. Take pleasure in the practice of humility.
So this is very interesting. Any of you, even in the house you live in, the people upstairs, or the people downstairs, or if you live in, like we do in the monastery in Nova Scotia, boy, how other people walk through the halls, how they open and close doors and everything. It can have quite an effect on your nervous system. And yet, when you're walking through the hall and when you're opening and closing doors, you aren't really making the connection that that's affecting how other people are feeling. So that's the point here, is to just be kind of aware, like what you're doing, do it with some sense of a vaster awareness of how much noise it's making or how much it might be grating on other people's nerves. And you could use yourself as a model of like what bothers you, at least to try not to bother other people in the same way that other people bother you. Do you see what I'm saying? So these verses are about being considerate. And it's very interesting. Some of you may have heard of the Zen teacher Toni Packer. When she does retreats, one of the key marks of her retreats is that there are no rules. It's very un-Zen-like in that way. But there are two things. One is that people keep silent. They don't have to come to the sittings. They can go for walks, and there's a tremendous freedom and relaxation in the schedule. That's one of her marks of her retreats. But everyone keeps silent. And also, when they first start and there's the orientation, I've been told that there's quite a little training about how to open and close doors. So in other words, the whole emphasis is on you can actually do what feels right for you in this retreat, but be considerate of other people at the same time. Don't let it be just self-absorbed in your own world, doing your own thing, and actually forgetting about the emotions and feelings of other people. So now 73 is a very charming verse. He lists, L-I-S-T, lists, S-L-I-S-T-S, lists, role models for mindfulness. And the role models are a heron, standing there for a long time on one leg waiting for the fish. A cat is the second one, waiting for the mouse. And the third is a burglar. So these three role models are for mindfulness. I think it's so wonderful. They go silently and carefully, and therefore they get what they're after. So you could use them as a role model to attain enlightenment. Okay, read this verse, Glenna.
Herons, cats, and burglars go silently and carefully. This is how they gain what they intend. And one who practices path behaves likewise.
Different results. You're not hoping to eat the poor mouse or the poor fish or steal the silver. But your intention is to wake up and so that you can benefit other people. And so that kind of mindfulness and that kind of, they're saying, if a heron can be that patient and mindful, if a burglar to get the silverware can be that patient and mindful, couldn't you be that motivated when enlightenment will be the prize, or at least a happier life? So, okay. So now, verse 74, read verse 74. It's about feedback. Okay.
When useful admonitions come unasked to those with skill in counseling their fellows, let them welcome them with humble gratitude and always strive to learn from everyone.
So just to remind you, these verses are on Gewa, gathering virtue. So he's been listing, the virtue of bigger view, that you're aware of your facial expression, your speech and your actions, how it affects others. Also the virtue of mindfulness, not forgetting to let burglars be your role model. And then this one, he's talking about the virtue of being able to accept feedback. And he said, when useful admonition, so he's not even saying, negative criticism or something, comes unasked. I love that word. You didn't ask for it, so usually you don't want it, right? But he even says it's coming from those who are actually quite skillful in counseling their fellows. He's saying, welcome feedback and learn from it. And Trungpa Rinpoche used to talk about that. He used to say, feedback can show you things that you don't want to look at. So even criticism, actually. And he used to say the sign that it's actually pertinent is that you take offense. Like it bothers you. And that's usually a sign that it's actually a deep thing that you don't want to look at, and they just kind of nailed you on it. Even if their intention was to hurt your feelings, it could actually benefit you if you listen to it. Not to mention positive feedback, which actually he'll talk about in the next verse. Or sometimes we get feedback and it's like a light bulb going off. Now that's interesting in terms of the virtue of being able to give feedback, is that, now I think there's a whole thing about non-aggressive communication as a kind of a skill you can learn. It's important, actually, if you can give feedback so that people can hear it. That's very helpful, because then often the light bulb goes off and it connects with your own wisdom and sanity about what you know to be true, and it's very helpful that someone told you the truth. On the other hand, if you feel offended, that's usually a sign that some truth has been spoken to, and you look at that. But there is a slogan which goes, a Mahayana teaching that goes, of the two judges, trust the principal one. And that's to say that ultimately you're the only one who knows if what other people think is true or not. If one judge is another person's view of you and one is your own assessment of yourself, ultimately you're the only one who knows whether you're off or on, whether you're opened or closed, whether you're uptight or loose. You're the only one who knows. So ultimately it comes back to that. But feedback can be helpful. It can show you your blind spots. And now 75 is good child rearing instruction. Read 75.
Praise all who speak the truth and say, your words are excellent. And when you notice others acting well, encourage them in terms of warm approval.
So in verse 74, he's talking about, feedback. And in verse 75, he's talking about the power of acknowledging when someone does well. That's why I say good child rearing instruction. But actually it's good adult rearing instruction too. And it's kind of interesting how much more common it is for us to only speak out when we think someone has done something wrong. Someone might do something that touches you and you feel touched, but this is saying be conscious enough to actually tell someone that it really helped you. because that's encouraging to us. It's encouraging to have someone else acknowledge that something they did for us really helped us. Okay, so 76 is very humorous. It's the same idea, but read this one.
Extol them even in their absence. When they're praised by others, do the same. But when the qualities they praise are yours, appreciate their skill in knowing qualities.
So the last two lines are about being able to accept compliments. Now, a lot of us have a lot of trouble accepting compliments, and he's saying it's actually a virtue. It's a form of gewa to be able to accept a compliment without like denying it or shutting down or just not being able to hear it, or however you react to receiving a compliment. So just accept it and appreciate it. And the first two lines, extol them even in their absence, and when they're praised by others, do the same. Now, he's going to be talking more about this in the 77 and 78. But this is the practice of beginning to, as a practice actually, rejoice in the good fortune of other people. I've also heard it taught you can rejoice in your own good fortune. It's beginning to get in touch with that virtuous quality of being able to rejoice, being able to appreciate, getting in touch with that heart quality. But he's saying here that rejoicing in other people's good fortune, like actually expressing out loud or to yourself, being glad when somebody else has something good come into their life.